Rumi wrote, "You were born with wings. Why do you crawl through life? But what if those wings are bound to a love that stains you from the inside? Have you ever felt that way? A love that enters silently, with sweet promises, with subtle touches of care, but that over time begins to fade away little by little? It's strange how some connections seem like love, but carry poison. And the worst part? You only realize it when you're already addicted. You begin by giving yourself completely, believing that to love is to endure, that to love is to bear, and then you find yourself accepting crumbs, justifying silences, becoming small, in the name of a love that was never pure. But that's what you thought you deserved. Not all love that is offered to you is pure. Not every touch is care. Not all presence is a refuge. Some people love you with dirty hands, with wounded hearts, with intentions they don't even understand themselves. And you, sensitive soul, end up absorbing this pain as if it were your own. But Rumi also said, don't distance yourself from those who bleed honestly, but run from those who smile with a rotten heart. How many times have you ignored that sign? How many times have you stayed just because someone said they loved you? Pure love does not require sacrificing your essence. He doesn't put chains where there should be wings. Pure love doesn't paralyze you. It lifts you up. But to see this, you need to awaken from an emotional trance that addicts the soul. You need to free yourself from the idea that love is pain, that deserving someone means accepting being hurt, because what nobody tells you is that you can get lost trying to be enough for someone who has never learned to see beyond themselves. You can become deformed trying to fit into the expectations of someone who only knows how to love halfway. And meanwhile, your soul screams in silence. She longs for a love that heals, not one that consumes, for a touch that cleans, not one that stains. But why do we remain trapped in loves like this? Why is it so difficult to let go of what's already dragging us down? Let's talk about that now. Because understanding this isn't just about the other person, it's about you, and about everything you still silently accept. If any part of that pain spoke to your soul, if you've ever dragged yourself down for love thinking it was flight, comment below. I deserve a love that cleanses me. This phrase is not just a comment, it's an initiation ritual, a turning point, a pact with your soul. And if this truly touched you, leave a like. It helps this video reach other souls who are also drowning in silence. Subscribe to the channel to continue this journey of healing, truth, and liberation. Because the next key might be exactly what you're looking for, and you didn't even know it yet. Have you ever loved someone and then felt smaller than before? As if you had left pieces of yourself behind. As if every gesture of affection was, in fact, a way of diminishing yourself to fit into the other person's world. Because sometimes what they call love is, in reality, a disguised exchange, where you give your soul and receive absence, where you give peace and receive doubt. And this slowly corrodes you from the inside like a silent wound that you learn to hide even from yourself. Not all love heals you. Some contaminate you. And the cruelest thing is that, often, what destroys you isn't the other person's presence, but your insistence on remaining where your soul has already asked to leave. You give. You surrender, you mold yourself, but in the end, you break, and not always in visible pieces. The breaking happens inside, in places where no one looks. It happens in the silence of nights when you lie next to someone and still feel alone. It happens in the effort you make not to bother them, not to seem too sensitive, not to lose someone who, deep down, never truly had you. This is the wound no one sees. The pain of giving yourself completely and still feeling insufficient, of loving with all your might and receiving crumbs, of accepting less than you deserve, because deep down you've started to believe that's the best you can get. And then, the cycle begins. The cycle of doubt, fear, and hope that never comes true. You start thinking, if I change, maybe he'll love me the right way. If I'm calmer, prettier, more understanding, maybe he'll stay. But what you haven't realized yet is that no matter how much you transform yourself, the love that comes from a misaligned heart will never be clean enough to make you blossom. There's a part of you that cries out for freedom, but you remain silent, because you've learned that love demands sacrifice, because you've confused intensity with depth, and now you carry the weight of a love that drags you away from yourself. This is dirty love, the kind that forces you to hide within yourself, The kind that masks control with care, that fills you with doubts with sweet words, and you, sensitive soul, begin to question yourself. Am I the problem? And so, little by little, you lose yourself. You stop listening to yourself. You stop prioritizing yourself. You become a hostage to a distorted idea of love that only exists in broken movies or in stories you created to justify what you feel. But it's not love that hurts. It's attachment. It's the illusion that someone who doesn't value you today will value you tomorrow, as long as you do everything right. But that tomorrow never comes, and you become emptied while you wait. The scariest thing is that it repeats itself. You leave one toxic relationship and, without realizing it, enter another with the same pattern. Because the wound, when not healed, becomes a magnet, an emotional magnet that attracts exactly what hurts you. And the more you try to fix the other person, the more you disintegrate. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." But there are those who are only breaking without ever opening. Repeating, empty, confusing relationships, where pain is constant and joy is fleeting. Where affection is intermittent and presence comes with conditions. You deserve more than someone who only shows up when they want to. More than quick messages amidst long silences. More than cold justifications for warm absences. Love isn't an enigma for you to decipher alone. It's not a test of endurance. It's not a battlefield where you need to prove your worth at every moment. Pure love is light. It's constant presence, not empty promises. It's emotional security, not recurring confusion. It's acceptance, not judgment. But to experience it, you need to recognize that you're trapped in a pattern that didn't begin with the other person, but within yourself. Often, you accept this tainted love because you learned too early to settle for less. Perhaps because you weren't seen as you deserved in childhood. Perhaps because you had to be too strong when you were still fragile. Perhaps because no one taught you that love begins within, and that everything that comes from the outside should only overflow what you already feel for yourself. But no, you learned to chase after it, to beg for emotional crumbs, to confuse absence with mystery and coldness with depth. You normalized lovelessness, and this makes you always return to the same point of pain, as if you were trapped in an invisible loop. But there's a part of you that still remembers who you were before the wound. A part that still dreams of a love that cleanses you, that sees you, that lifts you up. That part is alive. It's just suffocated by the layers of pain you've silently accumulated. And now, more than ever, it needs space, air, light. Because you weren't made to survive in relationships that extinguish you. You were born with wings, but you've been living on emotional crawls, begging for love with a wounded heart, hoping someone will save you from the pain you yourself allow. It's time to stop romanticizing what destroys you, to see that true love never forces you to disappear in order to exist, that you don't need to compete for affection, nor prove yourself worthy of a place in the heart of someone who doesn't offer you a home. Pure love doesn't need to be begged for. It simply is. And when it arrives, it heals. It doesn't contaminate. Now tell me something. Have you ever felt like you were disappearing inside a love? If this question made your soul tremble, write it in the comments below. I wasn't made to crawl. This sentence is your truth. Writing it down is starting to remember who you were before the wound. And that's where we'll continue. Have you ever noticed how the pain that marks you the most doesn't come from visible wounds, but from those that no one sees? The ones you collect in silence, disguised as strength. And no matter how hard you try to move on, something always pulls you back to the same kind of relationship, the same pattern, the same emptiness disguised as connection. This doesn't happen by chance. Rumi said, "What hurts you, guides you." What if the pain you feel is actually a sign, a whisper from your soul asking you to stop abandoning yourself? Because sometimes the love you call intense is just a reflection of your fear of being alone. An old fear, rooted in experiences you don't always allow yourself to revisit. When you accept less than you deserve, when you stay where there is no longer reciprocity, you are not suffering for the other person. You are suffering because you made an unconscious pact with self-abandonment. You gave up parts of yourself in the name of someone who couldn't even handle your commitment. And this cycle is cruel because it repeats itself. With each new relationship, you hope it will be different. But without realizing it, you carry along the same fears, the same insecurities, the same broken heart trying to love in order to be loved. You don't want someone. You want to be seen. You want to be chosen. You want for the first time not to have to beg for love. But the problem is deeper. The root isn't in the other person, but in everything you believe is necessary to be loved. You learned that you needed to deserve affection, that love is a reward for good behavior, that you need to be perfect, understanding, tireless, and so, you tolerate what should have left at the first painful silence. You don't suffer for him. You suffer for yourself, for all the times you felt your existence depended on someone's approval, for every time you swallowed words, desires, limits, for every night you cried and still responded sweetly the next day. This isn't love. It's a desperate attempt to survive emotionally in a battlefield you call a relationship. But this war, deep down, was always against yourself, against your essence that demands truth, against your intuition that always knew, but that you learned to silence. Because believing in what you feel means accepting that perhaps the love you so longed for was never there. And that hurts. It hurts to face the fact that you gave yourself entirely to someone who only wanted you in parts, that you molded yourself until you lost your form, that you faded away waiting to be lit by someone who barely knew how to hold their own light. Rumi also said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." But what happens when the heart only breaks and never opens? When each new fracture becomes just another reminder that you remain in the same place even while trying to get out of it? There's a point where pain ceases to be a circumstance and becomes identity. And that's where the danger lies. You start to get used to it. You start to call this hole home. You start to identify with the lack, with the waiting, with the effort. And then you no longer know how to live without carrying this pain. But this pain is not love. This pain is a reflection of how much you have been ignoring your own soul. You are trapped in a cycle of self-neglect disguised as love. And as long as you continue to seek outside what needs to be restored inside, this cycle will not end. You will continue to attract different versions of the same emptiness. People who offer you halves, who say they love you but don't support you emotionally, who envelop you with words, but leave you alone in the moments when you most need to be held. And the most perverse thing is that, in the eyes of others, many of these relationships seem like love, because they have beautiful gestures, because they have moments of passion, because they have promises. But only you know what happens when the lights go out. Only you know how much you need to hide your pain so as not to scare away the person by your side. Only you know the price you pay for appearing strong. That price is high, and it is collected every day, in anxiety, in insomnia, in low self-esteem, in emotional exhaustion. It's the price of not listening to your soul, of betraying yourself to keep the other person close, of loving so much that you forget to love yourself first. And meanwhile, life goes on. Your dreams get postponed. Your desires are put on the back burner. Your light is reduced to an almost extinguished flame. But it's still there. It still pulsates. It still persists. Because there's a part of you that knows that you were born for something greater, that you weren't made to be half, that there's something cleaner, lighter, truer than this love you've been accepting out of fear of not finding another. You are not here by chance. You were guided to this point because something within you is ready to awaken, to break this cycle, to stop running away from yourself. This is not just another conversation about love. It's a reunion with what you lost trying to please others. It's an invitation to return to yourself, to your truth, to your light. And tell me honestly, have you ever felt trapped in a cycle where you give your all and still feel empty? If this resonated with you, comment below. I refuse to abandon myself. This sentence is not a rant. It's a new beginning. It's a seed of return home. And that's the path we'll continue on. You begin to remember who you were before getting lost in the midst of this love that seemed like everything, but deep down was almost nothing. And perhaps the hardest part wasn't the absence, but the confusion. The way in the beginning, everything seemed intense, present, profound. How the attention came laden with sweet words, calculated gestures that seemed spontaneous, presences that became absences justified with beautiful speeches. What nobody told you is that not all care is love. Sometimes care is the most silent form of control. A control that doesn't shout, but that holds on. That doesn't force, but that makes you feel guilty for wanting more. An affection that envelops you until you no longer realize you're being manipulated. There's a very subtle difference between being cared for and being controlled. And when you have old emotional wounds, you carry within you such a deep hunger for attention that any gesture that resembles affection becomes a sign of love. But it isn't. Love isn't intermittent presence nor words that come with weight. It's not someone who praises you today but ignores you tomorrow. It's not this emotional game that forces you to dance to a tune you didn't write. And yet, you keep dancing. Because you've learned to accept little. Because little has become much when much has always been denied to you. The problem is that, over time, you start to confuse intensity with depth, neediness with passion, control with protection, jealousy with love, and this confusion takes root within you. It becomes a distorted lens through which you see all your relationships, until one day, you find yourself saying things like, "But he cares about me, that's why he wants to know everything I do," or "She's only insecure because she loves me too much." But deep down you feel it. You feel that something is wrong. You feel that that love doesn't allow you to breathe, that there's something suffocating in that exchange, that there's more fear than freedom, more pressure than acceptance. But you remain silent, because there's an unspoken pact within you, not to ruin what you believe to be your last chance at love. So you tolerate it, you justify it, you adapt, and little by little you fade away. You become a functional version of yourself, but one that no longer finds pleasure in existing. And that's no exaggeration. It's the consequence of living imprisoned within a story where you have to earn the bare minimum. And here's the truth that almost no one says out loud. Wounded people also love. But often, they love in the wrong way. They love with attachment, with demands, with unrealistic expectations. And you, with your sensitive soul and generous heart, become the field where these pains are poured out. You become the receptacle, the shoulder, the harbor, but never the destination. You are where they recover, not where they choose to stay. You are the one who welcomes, who holds, who waits, but almost never the one who is chosen entirely. And why do you accept this? Because long ago, someone taught you that love is effort, that to love is to endure, that if you are patient, loyal, and understanding enough, one day that person will realize your worth. But that day never comes, and you stay. You stay even when you already know you're being used emotionally. You stay even when your intuition screams. You stay because you're afraid to leave, because the little you receive seems like a lot compared to the nothing you've ever known. Rumi said, "Don't fall in love with someone who sees your body, but with someone who sees your soul." But what happens when you no longer show your soul for fear of it being rejected? What happens when you mold even your feelings to fit the expectations of someone who never had space to truly embrace you? What happens is that you disappear, not all at once, but in small parts, in every silence you swallow, in every time you say, "It's okay," when it's not, in every night you cry in secret and wake up with a practiced smile. And here's the darkest part. When you get used to little, any crumb seems like a feast. You start to appreciate quick replies, empty invitations, cold presences. You begin to interpret silence as maturity, indifference as independence, coldness as mystery. You start to romanticize absence, to justify neglect, to convince yourself that this is the most someone can give you. And the more you accept, the more you lose the sensitivity to recognize what is true. This is the emotional trap. When you believe you need to accept everything in order to end up with nothing. When you enter a relationship thinking you're being loved, but you're only being tolerated. When you believe what you feel is love, but it's just emotional dependence with a layer of fantasy. And then you ask yourself, how did I get out of this? How did I end up here? And the answer is always the same. You abandoned yourself. Back then, at some point, you decided that the other person was more important, that maintaining the connection was more urgent than maintaining yourself, that loneliness would be more painful than a suffocating relationship. And so you stayed. You molded yourself. You kept quiet. But deep down, something inside you knew, always knew. That's why healing doesn't begin with the other person. It begins when you look inward honestly. When you ask yourself without fear of the answer, why have I become accustomed to less than I deserve? Why am I always fighting to be enough? Why do I keep trying to fix relationships that only exist because I'm the one who's breaking them? If any part of this resonated with you, write it in the comments below. I refuse to live on crumbs. This phrase is a reminder, a silent call to your truth, because it is there, in that place of courage, that the next part of your story begins. And it is precisely along this path that we will follow. You spent so much time trying to be seen, trying to be chosen, trying to deserve what should have been given naturally. And in that process, you gave up parts of yourself. You smoothed your edges, diminished your dreams, adjusted your intensity so as not to bother anyone. You tried to fit in. You tried to be enough. You tried to transform absence into presence, doubt into certainty, coldness into love. But no matter how hard you tried, you always ended up feeling that same emptiness, that same feeling of being emotionally alone next to someone. It is at this point that the soul begins to plead for truth, and truth often hurts, but it hurts differently than the pain of self-annihilation for another. It hurts like a key turning inside your chest, opening a door you kept locked for fear of what you might find. Rumi reveals, you have to keep breaking your heart until it opens. It's not about breaking for just anyone. It's about understanding that the heart that refuses to open repeats the same patterns of pain. The pain you feel doesn't just come from the other person. It comes from your resistance to letting go of what's already over. It comes from the stubbornness in waiting for a change that never came. It comes from the hope you nurture every day, even knowing that this relationship no longer sustains you. You cling to an idea, to an idealized version of someone, to a story that only exists in your head, and that's as cruel as any abandonment, because while you insist on staying, you're distancing yourself from yourself. True love doesn't diminish you, it expands you. It doesn't demand that you hide your light, silence your intuition, or deny your needs. Pure love, true love, doesn't play with your fear of rejection. It welcomes, it cares, it doesn't confuse, it doesn't hurt only to heal later. It doesn't remain silent to be desired. It doesn't disappear to be valued. True love doesn't need constant proof, because it makes itself present even in silence. And perhaps, at this moment, your mind is trying to justify the other person, saying that they also have traumas, that she also has difficulties, that nobody is perfect. But healing isn't built on justifications. It's built on choices. And choosing to love someone who doesn't love you completely isn't romanticism. It's self-abandonment. Healing begins when you realize that loving yourself hurts less than being accepted by those who don't see you. Because self-love, despite being demanding, is faithful. It doesn't demand that you erase yourself. It doesn't ask you to be less. It doesn't manipulate you with silences. It's the only one that will be with you at all times, including those when you feel broken. And perhaps what you're experiencing now is exactly that, a spiritual invitation to return to yourself, to look clearly at everything you endured thinking it was normal, to stop romanticizing pains that only exist because you insist on remaining. You're not being punished by life, you're being awakened. And what hurts isn't the end of a love, it's the breaking of a pattern you've nurtured for too long. It's the collapse of an illusion. It's the end of a lie you told yourself just to avoid facing loneliness. But what you need to understand deeply is that the loneliness of being with someone who doesn't see you is much crueler than being alone, because at least in solitude, you have the chance to find yourself, to listen to yourself, to rebuild your soul without having to adapt to other people's expectations. Your heart opens when you stop begging, when you accept that your soul won't flourish in that place, when you understand that love shouldn't be about emotional survival, it should be about freedom. It should be about home, but you can't reach that place while clinging to memories that imprison you, to messages that confuse you, to promises that are never kept. You need to let go, not for the other person, for yourself. Spirituality teaches us that everything that is true flows. Everything that is love vibrates in truth, and what doesn't vibrate weighs us down. What doesn't welcome hurts. What doesn't illuminate darkens. You are here to learn the difference, and more than that, you are here to choose differently. It's not about pointing fingers. It's about realizing that you have accepted less than you deserve for fear of ending up with nothing. But self-love is never nothing. It is everything you have always sought in others. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters. But for the light to enter, you need to stop covering the wound with shallow loves. You need to let it bleed, yes. You need to face the pain. Because only then will you know what truly heals. Only then will you understand that there is a strength within you that no absence can destroy. There is a light that still pulsates, even after so many falls, even after so many no's. And perhaps now, after all this, you're feeling something strange, a tightness in your chest mixed with relief. That's your soul awakening. It's your truth asking to be heard. Don't ignore that call. It's real. It's yours. If this made sense to you, comment below. I choose the love that expands me. This phrase isn't just a pretty mantra. It's a key, an open door. And it's precisely through this opening that we will continue. Perhaps you're in exactly that kind of relationship right now. A relationship where you feel guilty for asking for the bare minimum, where even raising a simple need sounds like a demand, where expressing your pain becomes an accusation, where the other person's silence weighs more than any words could. And yet, you continue. You try to understand. You try to justify. You try to give it another chance, because you believe that maybe this time it will be different. Because deep down, you're still stuck on the idea that, with enough love, everything heals. But what you haven't realized yet is that love, when it's true, doesn't leave you in this constant state of emotional alert. You live walking on eggshells, controlling your words, shaping your reactions, because anything can be interpreted as an exaggeration. You swallow your truths to maintain peace, but this peace is false. It's fragile. It's a calm built on your own silencing. And even when he or she says they love you, you feel an emptiness. You feel it because deep down, love has become an argument, not a presence, a shield the other person uses to avoid emotional responsibility. And you accept it because you see their pain, you see their difficult past, you see their traumas, and this activates in you the desire to heal, to be the one who will change everything, to prove that love transforms. And then you start confusing empathy with surrender. You dive so deep into the other person's world that you forget to look at your own. And when you realize it, you no longer know what you feel. You no longer recognize your own needs. You've lost yourself between what you want and what you need to do to keep the other person around. And even if the red flags are there, you close your eyes, because you prefer to deal with the pain you know than to face the emptiness of a possible separation. You start repeating to yourself, but he suffered so much too. She only acts like this because she was hurt so badly. He just needs time. And without realizing it, you're trying to save someone who didn't even ask to be saved. You're trying to love twice as much to compensate for what the other person can't even give half of. And this, little by little, destroys your self-esteem. It makes you believe that loving is enduring, that giving yourself is synonymous with deserving, that loving someone broken makes you special. But it doesn't. It leaves you exhausted. Because connecting through pain isn't love, it's emotional addiction. It's an unconscious attraction born from your own history of abandonment. You've learned to bond with those who challenge you, who don't choose you completely, who keep you unbalanced. Because deep down, your wound recognizes itself in the wound of the other. You try to give what you've always wanted to receive. You try to be comfort, to be peace, to be home. But you forget to look at yourself and realize that no one has the right to settle in your heart if they aren't capable of taking care of it. And you persist, even tired, even hurt, because you think that's what love is, that every relationship requires sacrifice, that at some point the other person will realize everything you do, will change, will acknowledge it, but they don't change, because they've already gotten used to how much you tolerate, because they've already understood that you always come back, because you've taught them, even unintentionally, that you can be forgotten, neglected, ignored, and still be there, steadfast, waiting. And it's not because you're weak, it's because you have too big a heart. But a big heart wasn't made to fit into tight spaces. It was made to love consciously, to give within limits, to feel, yes, but without needing to destroy yourself in the process. And maybe no one taught you that. Maybe you only know this kind of love, the love that hurts, that binds, that makes you diminish yourself. But that's not love. It's dependence. It's attachment. It's a reflection of the inner child who still seeks approval, who is still afraid of being left, who still believes she needs to become worthy of affection. And it's not fair. It's not fair that you continue carrying the weight of someone's emotional history, that you continue blaming yourself for feeling, that you continue denying your intuition in the name of a fantasy. True love is presence. It's listening. It's building. It's not this game where you need to constantly prove that you're good enough. Love isn't a testing ground. It's a resting place. And you deserve to rest. You deserve to feel emotional security. You deserve a love that sees you without you needing to scream for attention. Perhaps you're still stuck on the idea that love heals everything. But love only heals when it's pure, when it's true, when it's free from emotional manipulation, when it doesn't depend on your pain to sustain itself, when it doesn't blame you for feeling too much, when it doesn't use your traumas as an excuse to repeat patterns, when it doesn't punish you for a past that he or she refuses to heal. You're not here to complete anyone. You're here to share. And any relationship where only one person grows isn't a connection. It's a prison. And if at this moment all of this seems familiar, if you feel you are living exactly this right now, feeling guilty for asking for the bare minimum, for wanting the basics, for wanting reciprocity, then perhaps it's time to ask yourself, how long will you continue confusing emotional addiction with love? How long will you accept this imbalance as if it were destiny? How long will you hide your pain to maintain a relationship that is already empty? If this resonated with you, leave a comment. Below, I no longer connect through pain. This phrase is a choice, a silent decision to break with patterns that have hurt you too much. And it is from this decision that we will continue. You don't need someone who confuses you. This is more than just a phrase. It's an urgent reminder, a truth your soul may have been waiting years to hear clearly. Because emotional confusion isn't a sign of depth, it's a symptom of imbalance. When someone truly loves you, you don't live in this constant state of doubt, tension, and anxiety that makes you rethink every gesture, every word, every silence. Love isn't a guessing game. It's not a series of tests where you constantly have to prove you deserve to stay. Pure love gives you grounding, it gives you peace, it gives you direction. And you know it. Deep down, you always knew. But it's hard to accept. It's hard to admit that you spent so much time trying to be chosen by someone who never intended to see you for who you were. That you lowered yourself, molded yourself, silenced yourself to fit into the heart of someone who never learned to love without hurting. And all of this was done in the name of love. But you've already realized that it's no longer about loving someone. It's about relearning to love yourself after everything you ignored in yourself to keep the other person around. You are the soul that loves intensely. You are the one who feels deeply, who gives yourself truthfully, who sees beyond the surface. But your depth wasn't made for those who only know how to swim on the edge. And it's too cruel to beg for crumbs while carrying within yourself a banquet of affection, care, and presence. When you love, you go all the way. But sometimes that end takes you far from yourself, because instead of loving in partnership, you've come to love in sacrifice. And this is where the turning point happens. Not a turning point born of anger or revenge, but a turning point born of clarity, of that feeling of enough is enough that comes when the pain finally loses its meaning, when you realize you're hurting yourself to keep someone emotionally comfortable, when you understand that the love that matters is the one that doesn't demand you lose yourself to be accepted. Rumi said, "You must tear down the parts of yourself that believe you don't deserve the love you dream of." And perhaps until now, you have lived with those parts intact. Parts of you that accepted less because they believed it was all they could have. That tolerated indifference, silence, emotional abandonment, all in the name of a love that only existed because you carried it all alone. But now, perhaps for the first time, those parts are beginning to crumble. And that's frightening, because you don't yet know who you will be without them. But at the same time, it's relieving, because you finally feel that you no longer want to live diminishing yourself to fit into someone else's affection. You begin to understand that you no longer need external confirmation, that you don't need him to say "I love you" to feel loved, that you don't need her to come back to believe you are worthy of love, that the other person's response no longer defines the value of your commitment, that your intensity isn't excessive. It was simply misplaced in situations where people didn't know what to do with so much of it, and something begins to change. The pain doesn't suddenly disappear, but it shifts. It stops being an open wound and starts to become a scar, a mark, a reminder of what you no longer accept, because those who have been broken know what it's like to be unseen, but they also learn, over time, to see themselves with different eyes, with more respect, with more presence, with more care. You begin to look at yourself with more kindness, to listen to your intuition more attentively, to set boundaries more firmly, because you realize that loving someone will never again mean ceasing to love yourself. You've already understood that you no longer want relationships that require your absence to function, that you will no longer accept emotional turmoil as proof of depth, that you are ready for a love that uplifts you, not one that weighs you down. You begin to return to yourself, to reoccupy the spaces you left empty, to rebuild your inner home, not in haste, not in despair, but with awareness, with presence, with truth. And in this process, you become more and more whole. And the more whole you become, the less tolerance you have for what fragments, less attachment to what is shallow, less fascination with those who disappear and return as if nothing had happened. Because now you understand that true love doesn't come intermittently, it comes consistently. It doesn't confuse, it calms. It doesn't invade, it respects. It doesn't demand, it adds. You're no longer available for relationships where you have to shrink yourself to avoid losing. You want something that makes you grow, that challenges you to be more yourself, not less. And if all of this makes sense to you, if something inside you is awakening, if your soul is vibrating with recognition, then write it in the comments. I am too whole to live in pieces. This phrase isn't meant to be pretty. It's meant to be lived. It's meant to be felt. Because it's through it that your story begins to be rewritten. And it's along this new path that we're going to follow now. You reach a point in your journey where you can no longer pretend you don't know. You've seen too much, felt too much, cried inside too many times while smiling on the outside. And even if you tried to justify the other person, give them more time, understand their emptiness, you've reached a limit, a place where the soul no longer allows negotiations with what hurts. Because when you spend too much time ignoring your intuition, something starts to get sick inside you. And it's not just emotional. The body feels it. Breathing becomes heavy. Energy dwindles. The light fades, little by little, while you continue trying to make work what has been broken for a long time. And then comes the call to choose. Not that easy logical choice where everything seems simple and clear, but that profound, almost spiritual choice, which demands courage. The choice between remaining trapped in what hurts or making space for what heals. The choice to distance yourself from what has always dragged you down, even if for a while it leaves you in the dark. Because the darkness of being alone is infinitely more sacred than the shadow of being with someone who extinguishes you. This choice is silent. It happens the moment you decide not to respond to that message that always confuses you. When you finally say no, even trembling inside. When you choose to sleep with a peaceful soul, instead of keeping someone close just to avoid feeling the weight of their absence. You realize that what truly hurts isn't loneliness. It's the emotional absence of someone who is physically by your side, but spiritually distant. And from there, awareness begins to expand. You start to remember who you were before you molded yourself, who you dreamed of being before accepting crumbs, what your light was like before you tried to extinguish it so as not to bother others. Not all love is pure. Some loves are bonds based on neediness, fear, and unconscious attachment. They are relationships that feed on your emptiness and grow on your lack of boundaries. They are repeated stories that seem different only on the surface, but that deep down always lead you to the same place, the feeling of not being enough. But the love that begins within you always purifies. It doesn't need external confirmation to exist. It doesn't depend on the presence of the other to be real. It is born when you decide to return to yourself with truth. When you say, I will no longer abandon myself. I choose to be my own home. And that changes everything. Because when you start choosing yourself, the external noises lose their power. That voice that said, you'll never find anyone better, begins to silence itself. That feeling that you need to accept any affection so you don't end up alone starts to disappear. You stop accepting less than you deserve because you finally understand that deserving was never the problem. The problem was forgetting that. The soul knows. It always knew. But it waited. It waited patiently for you to stop ignoring it. For you to stop searching outside for what could only be found within. For you to allow silence to speak louder than fear. Because the soul doesn't shout. It whispers. It falls silent when you betray yourself. And it shines when you respect yourself. Now it's ready. It no longer wants mere survival. It wants truth. It wants presence. It wants depth. And it wants that from you. It's no longer about the other person, about whether they'll come back, about whether she'll realize what she's lost, about whether things could ever be different. It's about you, about your emotional freedom, about your spiritual peace, about your ability to look in the mirror and recognize a whole woman or man, even after so much breaking down trying to fit in. It's about regaining your energy, reconnecting with your voice, finding your way again. And this isn't just a break with the other person. It's a separation from old versions of yourself. It's an energetic cut with patterns that held you back. It's a goodbye to the idea that love needs to hurt to be real. From now on, you no longer need to beg for connection. You create your own connection. You nourish yourself from within. You feed yourself with presence, with conscious silence, with choices aligned with your deepest truth. And this choice will require your daily presence. It won't be automatic. There will be days when the old ways will seem comfortable, when your body will crave the familiar, when memories will confuse longing with relapse. But it is in that moment that you remember what you lived through, what you endured, what you kept silent about, and you choose, once again, to honor yourself. That's why this moment is sacred, because it's no longer about waiting for the other person to change. It's about deciding that you will no longer be the same, that you will not return to places that wound your essence, that you will no longer allow love to be a battlefield, because love is a temple, it is healing, it is truth, and that truth begins within you. If all of this resonated with you, comment below. I choose what heals me. This phrase is more than a symbol. It's your silent declaration of freedom. It's your answer to the call of your soul. And it is from this choice that we will move forward together to the next step. And when you finally choose what heals you, something inside begins to align. It's not a spectacle, not a grand moment where everything changes at once. It's subtle. It's silent. It's the instant you feel your soul breathing again after so long in emotional apnea. It's the first night you lie down and no longer need to review dialogues, rehearse arguments, or search for traces of the other to remember who you are. It is there, in the simplicity of rediscovering yourself, that true transformation begins. You look back and you see how much you endured for fear of being alone. You see how much you lost trying to save relationships that only existed because you carried everything on your shoulders. You see how much you kept silent to keep the other person comfortable. You see how much you hurt yourself smiling to maintain a false peace. But above all, you see the strength you had to endure all of that and still be here now, whole, shattered in some places perhaps, but whole, because even when you were broken, your soul never stopped fighting for you. And now, everything that seemed impossible begins to seem possible. The lightness you thought you'd never feel again begins to emanate from within. The peace you sought in others begins to emerge in your own silence. You no longer need someone's presence to feel loved, because you've understood that the purest love is the one you learn to direct towards yourself. It's daily care. It's listening to your inner self. It's choosing to never abandon yourself again. When the soul begins to be heard, it no longer accepts crumbs. It no longer accepts halves. It no longer accepts this cycle of unfulfilled promises, of absences disguised as independence, of relationships where affection is conditional. It wants truth. It wants depth. It wants surrender. And it only recognizes as love that which respects its wholeness. Anything outside of that it returns. It refuses. It distances itself. And this refusal does not come from pride. It comes from spiritual maturity. Because love is indeed depth. It's real connection. But it's not imprisonment. It's not suffocation. It's not losing yourself so the other person can fit in. It's space. It's presence. It's permission to be. And you no longer need a love that drains you. You need a love that cleanses you, that washes away the pain the past left behind, that doesn't ask you to hide your intensity, that doesn't mold you to the limitations of the other person, that doesn't diminish you in the name of a superficial relationship. You need a love that sees you in silence and yet still sees you whole. A love that doesn't need games, disappearances, or tests of endurance. A love that simply is, that takes you closer to yourself, not further away, that awakens you and doesn't anesthetize you. That is a breeze, but also home. That is light, but also profound. That is earth and sky at the same time. And this kind of love begins within. It begins now. It begins with your silent decision to no longer surrender to what suffocates you. You are not an exaggeration. You are not difficult. You are not too intense. You are a living soul, You feel deeply because you were born to live true relationships. And whoever thinks you're too much can go looking for what's shallow. You will no longer apologize for feeling, nor for wanting more, nor for expecting the minimum. Because now you understand that the minimum for you is everything that respects you. Healing isn't about finding someone new. It's about finding yourself without rushing, without fear, without guilt. It's about allowing yourself to start over as many times as necessary. It's about taking a deep breath, even when memories try to pull you back. It's about looking in the mirror and saying, I choose myself, even if it costs me everything I once begged for. You don't need another cycle of waiting, another return that only confuses you, another fresh start with someone who never truly arrived. You need peace, truth, connection, and all of that resides within you, waiting, whispering, asking for space to bloom. If you felt this, if any part of what you heard spoke to your soul, write it here in the comments. I deserve a love that cleanses me, not one that suffocates me. Write this down as a prayer, an affirmation, a commitment to yourself, because it is from this silent decision that your soul begins to align with what it truly deserves to live. And it is along this path that we will continue. If you've stayed this far, it wasn't by chance. Your soul is in motion, your consciousness is expanding, and that deserves to be honored. So if this journey made sense to you, if each word touched something that was hidden inside, subscribe to the channel now to continue walking with me. Here, each video is a mirror, each word is a key, each encounter is a return to oneself. Leave a like now too, not because of an algorithm, but as a gesture of appreciation for this space we're creating together. This helps this message reach other souls who are also ready to awaken. Now don't forget to watch the next video that's appearing on the screen. It's the continuation of your healing process, the next piece of this emotional puzzle that your soul is putting together. See you at the next step.